So just a few tips for teams. These are some things that Miranda thought would be important to highlight. How to submit questions anonymously, how to turn off or turn on live captions in the Microsoft meeting notes, which are an option but are public to anyone. So if you use the meeting note feature, that will be saved so that everyone who's in this class can see those. So that's an important thing to know. And then recording and presentation, all of that will be listed under Teams in the webinar title, and so y'all can access that later on. All right. These are some of our summer events, health screenings that we have conducted. We don't have any others planned for the rest of the summer, but we will be having health screenings resume in August and September. So lots of fall classes and health screenings for y'all that will be coming up. We do have a few other summer classes in terms of the webinars like you're on today. So we'll be doing Saving Your Skin from the Sun, Don't Wait, Hydrate, and Alleviating Everyday Aches and Pains. And I will be teaching all three of those classes. And then we also have a couple of summer programs. The Beat the Summer Heat Challenge has already started. So the next one would be End of Summer Road Trip Challenge, which looks really, really fun. And those are some of our Move Spring app challenges, which we highly encourage you to use. And we also encourage you to sign up for the newsletter if you have not already done so. So welcome. Thanks for being here. So with that being said, we will get started. My name is Abby Horton. I'm a registered nurse, a certified health and life coach, a wellbeing ambassador, and a wellness class educator for wellness work life. And my contact information is here. I'm an assistant professor in the Capstone College of Nursing, and I am joined by my good friend and colleague, Allison Currington. Allison, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Currington. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and also a certified life coach as well. Some of you may have known me in my time in the School of Social Work, and I've recently transitioned to the Office of Academic Affairs as the Director of Faculty Development. And you can contact me at amcurrington at at sw.ua.edu or just the ua.edu.
Thank you, Allison. So our goals for today are to explore the concepts of work-life balance, to discuss the importance of stress management, and then to learn specific strategies to adopt a more healthy and balanced work life. So with that being said, we will say that this is just for educational purposes only. We want you to focus on what you can control, and sometimes that doesn't feel like there's a lot within your control. So we want you to focus on your attitude and your effort and how you show up for yourself. We want you to take what resonates with you and leave the rest. So treat this like a menu, or a buffet. I always use that example of just take a little bit of everything to see what you like, to see what works for you. And if it doesn't work, then try something else. We want you to remember to take baby steps anytime you make changes, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed. I think work-life balance, there is a sense of inherent overwhelm that really surrounds that conversation. So small progress is still progress. And then please do reach out if you have any questions or if you want to connect to any resources on campus, especially if your mental health is being impacted or your physical health is being impacted by this sense of not having a work-life balance. So I will turn it over to Allison. And if you just joined us, there is in the chat a self-compassion link so that you can do an inventory.
So we're going to start off with a very important topic to balance, any kind of balance, and that is self-compassion. And oftentimes we find that the reason people are not finding balance is they perhaps lack some compassion towards themselves. Perhaps you're able to give compassion towards others, but you're not so great at that yourself. So, what self compassion is really about is really treating yourself when you're having a hard time, when you're failing at something, or when you notice something that you don't really like about yourself, that you treat yourself with the same compassion you would treat someone else. So, we're going to, and I just want to say, instead of mercifully criticizing yourself, I mean, how many of you have the inner critic inside of you that talks to you? Well, this is about really putting that inner critic to the side and pulling out something else in you that is going to be more compassionate and being kind. And it's really important to understand where your level of self-compassion is as you're working to integrate work and life and all the things in between. So the link that Abby dropped in the chat, got to get my team's terms correct as well, will be something we're asking you to do. So we want to take you to take about 5 to 8 minutes to complete this survey. There are 3 areas. Area 1 is self-judgment, area 2 is isolation, and area 3 is over-identification. When you are finished, if you feel like you want to share what area you want to work on, just drop that in our chat. So we'll pause and do that. Okay, I'm going to bring y'all back. I know that some of you still may be working to fill out the assessment tests. Excuse me, self-compassion test. This is the work that Christina Neff has done on self-compassion and fierce self-compassion. It's something we'll point you to later, her work later in the presentation, but it's something I would certainly tell you to look a little more deeper in. But hopefully this gave you an idea. I see folks putting in the chat. We have folks that need to look and review their work in over-identification, self-judgment, and isolation. So it gives you an opportunity to look at where you can focus some of your self-compassion, moving that into a more compassionate space in your life. Abby, if you'll go to the next slide. And one of the reasons we wanted to start off with self-compassion is to give you the idea of where you might need to focus so that you can be more compassionate, is so that you can begin to integrate that into your work-life balance. There are 3 elements of self-compassion. So there is, and this is some of what the test just scored you on, there is the self-kindness versus the self-judgment. So when we think about self-compassion, it entails being warm and understanding towards ourselves when we're suffering, when we feel inadequate, or when we are filling ourselves with self-criticism, which many of us do. When we're self-compassionate, we recognize that a part of life is being imperfect, that we're going to fail, that we're going to experience difficult times in life. So it's important that we're gentle with ourselves. So that would be the self-kindness. When we're overcritical, that would be more of the self-judgment. So those of you that are seeing the self-judgment come out, working on that self-kindness will be important. The second one is the common humanity versus isolation. So this is when we think about being frustrated, not having things exactly as we want them to be, we can become sometimes frustrated. That can turn into irrational behaviors, which can lead to sometimes isolation. Sometimes we think we're the only person that is suffering, or we're the only person that makes mistakes. But we have to remember that all humans suffer, and that the definition of being human means that we are going to be vulnerable and imperfect. So self-compassion is really involving that, just the recognition that all suffer, and that imperfection and personal inadequacy is a part of the human experience. It's something we all go through. So if you are moving more towards the isolation side, you really want to begin to practice this idea of common humanity. And then the third area is mindfulness versus over-identification. So in self-compassion and a balanced approach, we really want to balance our negative emotions so that we're not suppressing our feelings, but we're also not exaggerating our feelings. We want to make sure that the process of relating to these experiences and to others who are suffering, that it doesn't make us put our perspective and our experience larger or minimize those as well. We really want to observe our negative thoughts with openness and with clarity, and this takes mindful awareness and mindful practice. And mindfulness is not judgmental. It's receptive and an open state of mind, and it helps us to not either be over-identified or minimize the situation. So we don't want to get swept up, and we don't want to react negatively. So if you're over-identifying, really putting in some mindful practices will help you keep that balance as well. Next slide, Abby. So take a minute and look at this. So this is one way to practice self-compassion. So how would you treat a friend? This is a simple way when you're dealing with something that you're struggling with, or that you find is not a good experience for yourself. So think about a time when you've had a close friend or colleague that feels really bad about him or herself, or is struggling in some way. Could be through a medical diagnosis, could be something that's happened at work or with family. How would you respond to your friend in this situation, especially when you're doing your best? So just, you can jot it down, but what would you say? What would be your response to your friend? Anybody feel free to drop anything in the chat that you would feel led to say to your friend or colleague. When I think about this, I'm really thinking about if I have a friend or colleague who's going through a hard time, what I would say to them would be, sounds like this is a really difficult time for you. This must be overwhelming. This must be hard. I'd really be trying to just listen and hold space for them as they're moving through the difficult time. The next question is how to think about a time when you have felt bad about yourself, when you are struggling, and how do you typically respond to yourself in these situations? And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and particularly for those that might have been in the non-judgmental side of the test, the judgmental side, is that perhaps you are more critical, like, come on, Allison, just get over this. You don't need to be complaining. You are fine. You can do this. And while some of that stuff, some of those lines are good self-talk, because there are hard things, there is a time that we need to step back and acknowledge the pain and the struggle that we're having, to take time to process those emotions and to hold space for ourselves. Anything you want to drop in the chat that comes to mind for any of you about how you might be your inner critic that gets going for yourself? So you want to notice the difference. So it's always a good time to ask yourself, what would you say to a friend? And then what are you doing or saying to yourself? And really move towards trying to treat yourself like you would a friend or colleague in a more compassionate way. Okay, next slide, Abby.
Okay, y'all, I am actually going to need to exit out because my controls keep disappearing, and I apologize about that. And we're about to go into the work section, so let's see if y'all can. I think I'm going to have to stop sharing to share again, so let's try. Okay, can you see the slides now? Allison,
Yes.
can you see?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you. So,
Okay.
as Allison mentioned about the work aspect and the self compassion that you must have, I think it's really important to note that work can be any activity involving a mental or physical effort. And so, when you think about trying to work well with self compassion and how you balance life, I think that is really an important piece. And so, as Allison goes through this next section, once she completes the work section, we'll talk about life and then we'll talk at the end about how we integrate that together. So, go ahead, Allison.
Okay, so here's the good news. We have the privilege of having a job, and we get to show up fully to achieve our purpose for each day and to move into results. And that's a privilege. Let's call that a win. However, we know that for many of us that work becomes a serious challenge, and it puts a amount of stress in our life, especially when there's those curveballs that get thrown in life that we're not expecting. So let's spend a few minutes talking about work stress and burnout. Next slide, Abby. Okay, so take a look at this slide. And as you can see from the slide, there is a significant amount of burnout in the workplace. And what's encouraging to see from the slide is 87% of professionals say that they have a passion for their current job. And I'll say again, that's a win. And we'll take it. But sadly, 64% of professionals say that they frequently feel stressed or frustrated. And more problematically, 77% of professionals have experienced burnout at their current job. Certainly, there is work to be done within our institutions to assist employees for preventing that burnout. And preventing burnout in institutions and corporations would be nothing short of a miracle. And most of the time, what we have to think about with miracles is that that happens individually with us. It happens inside us. Not often does the institution cause the change inside. It's usually us. So how do we shift our practices to prevent burnout? All right, next slide, Abby. Okay, the first question we need to answer and understand is the difference between stress and burnout. So this chart does provide a quick reference to the difference that you can look at. And stress is really about being in the weeds. And burnout is more of an overall disconnection from all of the weeds and more about the big picture, disconnection to the big picture. According to Brene Brown, when we feel stressed, we evaluate environmental demand beyond our ability to cope successfully. So this includes elements of unpredictability, uncontrollability, and feeling overloaded. Emily and Amelia Nagoski define stress as a neurological, physiological shift that happens in our bodies. It's evolutionary, adaptive response that helps us cope with things. And one of the things they talk about in their book is that long time ago, when there was more of the hunter-gatherer parts of the world, you would perhaps be in the wilderness jungle, and perhaps you would be getting chased by a lion. And so, you think about the fight, flight, or freeze response. And let's say in that response, you run, you are able to get the lion and kill the lion, and then you take the lion back to your community and they celebrate and you feast. So our lions today, we don't know, they're more chronic, they're more everyday. We're not necessarily hopefully you're not being chased by a lion in your parts of the university, but symbolically you may have a lion at work. And by in the tribal world and in the hunter-gatherer, by being able to run, sort of fight and get that animal and then have a celebration, you really are able to close the stress cycle all within that period. And what happens to us is that we have chronic stressors every day, and we're not necessarily closing that cycle. So if you'll move to the next slide. So work is an external stressor. We can also have internal stressors like criticism, body image. We talked about that, negative thoughts and memories. So that's why we talked about being more self-compassionate. But just because you've dealt with the stressor doesn't mean it's going to come back to you every day. So you really have to manage that stress every day. And you have to get in the habit to do something that signals your body that you are safe and that you have closed the stress cycle. So if you have a colleague at work that feels stressful to you, or a situation, you want to close the stress cycle, similar to we talked about the story in the line, and we're going to talk about that, how to do that. So next slide. So you will see on this slide factors that impact work stress. So real quickly, look at this, and on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being no stress and 10 being the most stressful, rate how stressful these factors are for you. So it could be 1 to 10. If you're comfortable, drop one of their most stressful factors in this chat. And you can add to this list. This isn't an all-inclusive list of what's stressful at work. Deadlines. The big one. Unhealthy work environment. Lack of deadlines sometimes. That's a good point. Good point. So it's good to sort of scale and see where you are in these so you'll know, because we can get stuck in the mindset that these stressors, mindset of these stressors, because it's chronic. So when you are constantly having to deal with it, we also can get stuck because we're being socially appropriate. So your brain is telling you to do something like sit quietly, politely, smile. And then third, because it's the safer thing to do is to get stuck and not deal with it. And all of these lead to us not being able to close the stress cycle and the chemicals that impact our body. So why is it important to close the stress cycle? Abby, if you'll change the slide. So when we don't close the stress cycle, we see that work performance declines. We probably feel and notice in ourselves and perhaps other the irritability and mood changes. We have a loss of engagement. We've talked about that, the disconnect, and then we can end up physically sick and distressed. Next slide, Abby. Okay, so here are some things you can do to close your stress cycle. Very first thing, it's a simple one, is find a mantra. Find something that gets you through the day, one step at a time. That's an easy mantra. You can do any of these things listed. The most effective way to close your stress cycle is physical activity. It's going to close it the quickest and fastest of all the things. So if you can move your body in physical activity, just like we think about the person chasing the line or running from the line, either way, they're moving their body. So that's really important. Breathing, make sure that you can do this at any point. There's the box breath, there's all kinds of apps, Calm, Headspace, Mindful app, there's all kinds of apps, but you can do breathing and you can do these in between meetings, on the go, that keeps you changing the physiology of your body for the better. Positive social interaction. So sometimes we think about work and we think about the negative social interaction, but be with those who lift you up. Find those spaces at work. If that's not in your building, take a walk to the next building. Have a Zoom meeting with somebody or Teams meeting that lifts you up. Laughter. Get into that belly laughing, whether it's a funny movie, whether it's a funny show, whether it's a toddler, whatever it is that makes you laugh. Animals, do that deep belly laughter. Affection. This may be hard for some, and that's okay, but if you hug someone for 20 seconds, it literally lowers your blood pressure. That's in the science. So, of course, at work, you want to always get permission and make sure you're hugging the people that want to be hugged. Cry. We build up a pressure cooker, and sometimes just a really good cry is important for us. Creative expression. Do you write? Do you journal? Do you sing? Do you dance? Do you paint? Do you just set tables and do tablescapes? Do you plan parties? There's lots of ways to be creative. So be creative. And how are you going to know? Because your body's going to tell you. The physiology in your body, the fit will change and for the better. So pick one way that you can take this week, today, and give it a try.
Thank you, Allison. So now we're going to talk about life and everything that's beyond work. And keeping in mind that the stress cycle is going to come up again and again. So it's not a matter of trying to avoid stress, which I think is sometimes how we talk about stress. We talk about it as if we shouldn't have any stress. And we have a talk on don't stress about stress. And I tell you that there is a Spotify playlist that says, don't stress, but that's not how we really live our lives. Stress can be really good for us. It helps us feel prepared. It helps us to know what's important to us because if we're stressed about something, maybe we have a big presentation at work. Maybe our kids are trying out for a school event or a grandchild, and we're a little stressed, we're a little nervous about it. It means that it's something that we care about. It's something that's important to us. And so Those can be good indicators, but we can't be totally stress free. And so, when we think about completing the stress cycle, if you get an email and it feels like a lion, if that's your lion today, get up and literally just move your body. Just before you respond to that email, get out of your chair, walk around your floor, maybe go outside for a minute, but just moving your body within about 2 to 3 minutes, your body's reaction to that stressor will go away. That hormonal cascade will actually start to lessen. It's that feeling you get when you're about to hit the brakes to avoid a near collision, and that feeling of getting hot in your heart starts racing and you feel a little panicked, and then you start to kind of come down off of that adrenaline high that you get. It's the same response that we get when we have the lions that Allison mentioned in the form of emails, or a colleague that may be, in conflict or disagreement, or maybe a big project that's looming. Those are our lions, and those are our, tapping the brakes. And so we have to give ourselves time to come off of that hormonal cascade that's literally trying to prepare our bodies to fight or to flee. And so, if we can get up and move our bodies in that moment, not just having exercise after work, that's great and that's needed, but literally move your body in that moment, that will help get those hormones back to where they need to be, back to baseline. And then your brain can kind of say, okay, that email is not so bad. I can deal with this, I can manage that stressor. And so, that is a good tip, I think, to complete the stress cycle in the moment. So there is a saying that there's no such thing as work-life balance. There are work-life choices, and you make them, and they have consequences. And that's so true. It's the notion that every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so every single time you say yes, you are inadvertently saying no to something else. Choose wisely. And that's so important because I am a people pleaser. I am really perfectionistic. I like to help. I like to say yes. And so it's really important to surround yourself with people who can help you be accountable as you're starting to make changes in how you set healthy boundaries. So, Allison, I mentioned, is a dear friend, and she is one of those people that can help me, hold that mirror up to myself and say, why am I saying yes? And so, one thing that you can do is really to make a list of all of the commitments and obligations that you may have. And some of those you may have for, a period of time. Some of them may be more, longer duration, and some of them may not have a deadline in sight. You're committed until you decide that you're going to stop. And so when you look at the yeses that you're saying right now versus the yeses that you want to be saying, I think that can be really helpful in determining where you want to make some changes, because cultivating work-life balance is great, reducing your stress is great, but if you're still overcommitted, it's going to be really difficult for you to continue on trying to achieve that balance. And when we talk about balance, we often think about balance as the scales of justice, where they're equally balanced, or like scales that you're weighing something where, both sides are equally in balance. And we think that that's what life and work should look like. But again, that's not realistic, right? It's not realistic to be totally stress free. It's not realistic to be completely in balance with home and with work and with life. And so I like to think about work life balance more as a balanced budget, where every category has an allotted amount, just like you would a financial budget, a household budget. And so, it may not be that you're giving 100% to work right now. You may be needing to give a little bit more effort at home. It may not be that you're, able to work on this particular project to the full amount of your effort, because maybe you have competing interests in different projects you're working on that you're juggling at the same time. And so it's more of looking at your week to week, and then zooming out and looking at your month, your semester, your quarter, however you're categorizing your time, to see where you're spending that time and that energy and that effort. And so think about that as we kind of move through. Another thing that I implemented is a committee of no. So having 2 or 3 people who know you well, I think this is helpful to have maybe your spouse or your partner as one of your committees of no, because if you're saying yes or no to things, that's probably impacting your relationship or those that you live with or those that you're in community with. And so, definitely having your spouse or partner or the people in your family, a roommate, whomever it may be, having them on board is great. But I think having a few other people who aren't directly impacted is also helpful. So having someone who understands your work, but maybe isn't someone who you work closely with. Allison kind of fulfills that role for me. And then having someone else that just really sees you as a person, doesn't see you as a family member, doesn't see you as a colleague or coworker, and kind of understands you from a more holistic perspective. And so I have a good friend that really doesn't understand or know a lot about my work, but she just knows me as a person and knew me before I was a wife and a mom and a nurse and an employee. And so she sees a different aspect of my personality. And so having those people on my committee of no, when I talk to those folks, it's really important to say, this is what I'm really hoping to get out of this conversation. I would love for your feedback. Give them permission to give you feedback, but also give them the disclaimer that you don't have to tell me. I'm not looking for you to tell me what to do in this situation. I'm not looking for you to, prescribe a yes or a no, but I would just like your thoughts on this. Or what do you think about this opportunity for me? Do you think that this is something that is really helpful? And just get their perspective and their take on it. Now, everyone is not going to need that. There are people in my life that have no problem saying yeses and nos, and they don't need that outside accountability or that outside conversation. But for many people who feel stuck or overwhelmed or stressed, or for people who are looking for better work life balance, those folks tend to need some of that external conversation. I process things externally. And so just having someone to talk to and to talk it through, for them to just ask me a couple of questions, that really helps me in making my decisions. And I think that's true for many people. So ask yourself when you're making a decision, does this align with my goals and my values? Does this move the needle forward on my goals? So is this going to help me make progress toward the things that I say are important? If I am saying no to this or yes to this, what's the no or yes on the other end, right? So sometimes we say no and we're saying no to one decision, and that is opening up a yes in another. Or we say yes now in this moment, but then that's saying no to something in the future. And so we just really have to look at that and the impact that it has not only on our time and our energy, but on the meaningfulness and purpose that we get from the work that we're doing. And so that's something that I think really helps to frame things. When you need to take a deeper look, Allison and I talked about creating a filter or a rubric for making decisions. And so for me, I have a list of about 15 questions that I ask myself when I'm going to make a decision. And sometimes I make a decision and I decide that what I'm going to do is just say the next right thing, the next best yes, and see how things unfold, because I really believe that things work out how they're supposed to, that everything happens for a reason, even if we don't really know it in the moment. And, sometimes if you keep getting an opportunity, it may be that you want to explore that. So perhaps you can explore the possibility of saying yes without committing to it. Or maybe you can negotiate. I'll give a personal example because I think that this is really helpful. I'll always enjoy people's stories, but I was nominated for an opportunity that it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, but I've had a lot of good opportunities recently, and I don't really have the capacity to say yes to this thing. And I actually was getting offered something that was going to be a little bit more involved than what I had initially, kind of signed up for. And so normally I would just say yes and hope that everything worked out, or I would just say no and say, I'm sorry, I don't have the capacity for that. But I actually went back to the committee and said, what if I was considered for this piece, but not this piece? Because I have the time to do this role, but I don't have time to do that role. And I'd really like to be involved in your organization. And that's something before instituting the committee of no, before instituting these filters or rubrics, I would have just thought it's a yes or it's a no, and I don't have any room for negotiation. But because I'm doing the same work that we're asking you to do, I saw a different opportunity, a different possibility. And so now that is going to be a possibility. I still don't know if that's going to work out, but it made me feel really good in the moment. And anytime you say no, I think it's always helpful to say, I can't do this right now, but I have a great friend, a great colleague that would be perfect for this. Do you mind if I suggest them, or can I reach out to them and see if this would be something they'd be willing to do? And that always makes me feel good about turning down an opportunity because I'm still helping someone else out. And I'm helping really two people out because maybe they need that connection. And so that's always a good way to say no as well. The Eisenhower decision tree matrix, I think, is so important because it's a framework that you can use in any situation. So if you look at this, it's set up like the matrix that you use when you're doing genealogy, if y'all remember that from biology class. But if it's important and it's urgent, then you need to do it and do it now, preferably. If it's important but not urgent, then you need to decide, schedule a time to do it later. And one thing that you can think about that is also defer. So decide or defer when you're going to have time to do that thing, that task. And then something that's not important but it's urgent, can you delegate it? Is there someone else that can do that for you? And then if it's not important and it's not urgent, can you consider how you might delete that or avoid that in the future? So I think a lot of times when we're trying to make decisions about how to get better balance, and I think we like to sometimes talk about it, Allison and I do, in terms of integration or harmony, because balance, like we said, is such a misnomer. But if you think about, how can I avoid this thing? That's a coping strategy with stress. If I can avoid it, if I can adapt to it, or I can alter it. Those are three ways that you can think about managing stressors. And so, is there a way for me just to delete this thing that's not really important, it's not really urgent? Is it really needed on my to-do list? And then delegation, I think, is a challenge for a lot of people. It was for me initially because I thought, when I first started doing this coaching work, I don't have anyone that I can delegate to. I, at the time, was an instructor, now in an assistant professor role. I still don't have people that I can delegate to. And a lot of times we don't have the budgets in our home life either to delegate. We may not have the funds or the budget to have services like housekeeping or lawn care or things. You may be doing that on your own or, with your family. But what you can consider is, do I have a friend that I could trade a service with? Do I have a neighbor? Or, is there a local high school student that could come and cut my grass or mow my grass for a reduced cost that might save me some money? So, thinking about how much we make hourly and how we're best utilizing our resources is another part of that delegation piece. Because if you're paying less than what you could earn or what you do earn in an hour, it may be worth it to let someone else do those things for you, at least occasionally. You also, can utilize other services. So there are so many apps and things and subscription services that you can employ to almost delegate your meal planning and prep. Or, using grocery pickup is always a fun one that I think we underutilize. So there are ways that you can delegate even if you don't have an assistant or you don't have someone at home, or perhaps you don't have services that regularly come to your home, where you get that delegation piece without having to spend a lot. So that's something to consider as you move forward in making decisions. And then how do you achieve balance? Like I mentioned, it's really more of a budget than a scale. And so this integration or harmony piece is really, how can I approach work in my career and still address my community and my connection and have well-being and health and interact well at home and with my family. And that is at the heart of work-life integration that you see in this image here on the right of the screen. And so I think some things that you can do are things like leaving 10 minutes every hour just to build in margin in between meetings. So not scheduling meetings back to back or ending meetings early. One of my favorite things to suggest is to not have hour-long meetings. We're accustomed to hour-long meetings because that's the norm, but I think having a 30-minute meeting, trying to do a few things via email and then connecting and touching base for 30 minutes, that is life-changing in terms of getting back time in your day. So that is something that I would really, really highly recommend and encourage. Never meeting without an agenda. That's something that's really important. That's going to leave you more time for life. Maybe having a walk and talk meeting. So that's something that I have not done before, but I'm actually having a walk and talk with Allison later today because it gives you a couple of different things. You can get some sunshine and some vitamin D and get outside. You're getting some physical movement and you're walking. So you're going to be a little bit more cognizant of your agenda that you're using because you're moving. You're not just sitting idle and chatting on Zoom or Teams or having a typical coffee or lunch meeting, but you're getting a lot of different sources of interaction and you're multitasking in a good way. How much time do you want to spend on work and personal and sleep? So when you budget those hours, you're spending about 8 hours at work, about 8 for personal, and about 8 for sleep. And I know that doesn't, account for your commute time, but use that time wisely. So when you're going to and from work, listening to uplifting music or listening to a podcast or a book or just having some silence and enjoying, the drive home. Taking a different route to or from work is always fun, and it's a little easier to try in the summer when there's not as much traffic. So think about how you want to time block the hours that you do have and look at how well you're using those hours. Are you so tired when you get home from work that you're really just cooking dinner, doing what has to get done in terms of, throwing laundry on or, you know, um, doing some mild housework, and then you're really just kind of sitting with a book or your phone or the TV or something like that. How much of those kinds of tasks that, may be relaxing in the moment, but may actually be draining you, later on, how much is that really taking a part of your evenings? Or maybe it's that you have young kids, or maybe you're a caregiver for someone. Look at how you're using those hours after work to see if there's something that you want to change there. I think that's always a little surprising when we see how we use our downtime and how we use our weekends as well. So, what gets scheduled gets done. I always say that if you are going to the dentist, the reason you make it to the dentist and not other appointments is because it has a specific day, a specific time. They're going to send you, reminders probably via text or email or calls. They've given you a little business card with the time and the date. There's a reward for going. You get your little, bag of goodies and your new toothbrush and toothpaste. And you get to see your dentist. I love my dentist, so that's always a treat. But also there is, kind of a built-in, and I won't say punishment, but there's a built-in penalty for not going a lot of times. You might feel guilt over not making your appointment. They're probably going to call you and follow up. Why did you miss? Let's get you rescheduled. And there's going to be likely a fee sometimes for missing those appointments. And so you have to build those kinds of things in so that you have accountability. So schedule everything. Schedule when you're going to rest, schedule when you're going to go to bed, schedule when you're going to have fun and play, and when you're going to do your errands and exercise, when you're going to do your housework, when you're going to have date nights, whether that's a date night with yourself or a friend or a spouse or partner. When are you going to grocery shop? When are you going to fill up your car with gas and go to the car wash and all of those things. When I was first starting out as a young professional and then later as a nurse when I went back to nursing school, I did all of these things when they had to get done. I went to the grocery store when I was out of milk and bread. I went to fill up my car with gas when I was nearly on empty. I washed my clothes when I was out of clean laundry. I did my housework when it became evident that I couldn't delay it anymore. And not because, we sometimes say that people who procrastinate are lazy. And I think that's, not a kind thing to say about people or to say about ourselves. But I think procrastination is really about energy and it's about wanting to be perfectionistic. And so, in that season of life, I was a young mother and I had a very busy life at home and at work, and things got done when things had to get done because it didn't feel like there was a lot of margin. And so, if that's how you're living your life, I would encourage you to kind of do an assessment and see where can you pause and put in times of rest because you need rest to be able to feel like you have the energy and the motivation to get started. Motivation's going to get you started, but the discipline of having a habit of doing these things every day, every week is what's going to keep you going. So assign everything a time and a date, make appointments with yourself, even if it's just with yourself. Schedule your lunch breaks, take those. That is your time. So make sure that you're taking your lunch. Don't work through lunch. Step away from your desk, get outside, go to meet a friend. Update your calendar and review it often. In teaching students, it's funny that, they share a lot of good insight, and they said, well, my calendar is up to date, but I never look at it. I don't look at it every day. And so make sure that you're looking at your calendar every day. And that if you're using more than one paper, more than one digital calendar, that you're syncing all of those up. And a good time to do that is on the weekend to look at the week ahead. So I meet with my spouse and my kids, and I look at my calendar. We coordinate where people need to be picked up and dropped off. We meal plan for the week, and we pick up our groceries. We look at the weather so we know what we want to wear or what we need to do in terms of, is it going to be raining? What's our week look like in terms of that? Pick out our clothes for the week. So really preparing for the week starts the day the week before. Preparing for the next morning starts the night before. And so if mornings are chaotic, if Mondays are chaotic, think about doing some prep work over the weekend. And then remember that your brain likes to process information, but it doesn't like to store it. And so, we often say that our brains are like computer systems, and they are, but they're not. And so your brain likes to think through things. It likes to, explore. It likes to look out for warning signs and pick up on patterns, but it doesn't like to just be your short-term storage. It does really well with long-term storage, but short-term, it really needs to have some help there. And so having some detailed lists is really helpful. Scheduling things, using routines and rhythms so that every Friday you're going to the car wash and you're going to fill up your car with gas. That is just so helpful because you don't have to think about it, you don't have to fit it in, and you don't have to wait until you're running out of gas. That seems really, really oversimple and like it's not going to be helpful, but I promise you it will change your life. Batch like tasks. So sit down and open your email, and don't leave your Outlook open all day. I know it feels like that you have to, but if you just get in the habit of checking once an hour, if you are heavily email based, or if you can even go longer, once in the morning, once before lunch, once after lunch, once at the end of the day, especially if you're working on big projects that aren't email based, that's helpful. Downloading things that you might need from your email the day before so that you don't even have to open it first thing is also a really good idea. Keeping notes about your work and what you need to get accomplished at home and at your office is helpful too, because then you can just pick back up. I call that leaving breadcrumbs so that okay, I got I've got to get to this point in the project today, and then this is where I'm going to pick up tomorrow. That takes away some of the stress and anxiety of I just don't know where to start, because getting started is often the hardest part. You want to try to avoid multitasking, specifically when you're trying to multitask multiple projects that the brain needs your focused attention. So, multitasking in a good way looks like having a walk and talk, right? You're getting your sunshine, you're moving your body, and you're having your conversation. Brain does pretty well with that. Folding laundry while watching TV, brain does pretty well with that. But trying to do multiple things like listen to a podcast while trying to work on a project, the brain doesn't really like that as much. Or trying to work on something during a meeting. Your brain doesn't really like that as much because it's getting its attention pulled in multiple directions. Again, taking care of your physical and mental health is going to be paramount to being able to cultivating a healthy work-life balance or harmony. So don't skip your meals, take frequent breaks, make sure that you're staying hydrated, that you're going to the restroom, that you're getting up every hour, that you're eating your lunch, during your dedicated lunch time, that you're building in margin, like I mentioned, and leave time at the end of the day for you to think about what you need to get accomplished tomorrow. And then crowdsource strategies for managing life well. So if y'all want to pop in the chat something that you have found to be really, really helpful, the good thing about Teams is that it's going to capture that and we can come back to it later. So crowdsource in the chat things that you have found helpful, an app, a strategy, a tactical tool, a podcast, a book, something that you do every week that really makes your life better. those are going to be really helpful. And I'm excited to see what you put there because Allison and I do this work, but we are not perfect. We're human just like y'all, and we constantly are having to reassess and recalibrate. So I'm interested to see what y'all share. Parkinson's law, this is so true for me. Parkinson's law, the time and the work will expand based on how much you give yourself time for it. So when a neighbor's coming over, when your in-laws are coming to visit, that's why your house gets cleaned in 30 minutes when you can't get it cleaned in 30 days because you have a timeline. They're going to be on your doorstep in 30 minutes. Do that same thing with everything in your life. Put a faux deadline on it so that you feel more motivated and inspired to get that thing done. Set a timer. So using the Pomodoro method is really helpful for me. You can set a timer for 25 minutes or 45 minutes and then take a 5 to 15-minute break. And this helps you get focused work done. So if I have a writing project to do or if I have grading or something to do, I will set a timer for 45 minutes and then I'll take a 15-minute break. And you do this for a cycle of 4. You can get about 4 of those in before lunchtime if you're taking lunch at 12 o'clock, and you will be amazed at how much you get done. Another thing that I like to do, I printed this to show y'all because I'm going to do it this afternoon myself, but I created a checklist for 15 things that I want to get accomplished. So we talk about our top 3 priority. So pick your top 3 every day. So then that would be for your work week, 15 things that you could get done in a week. And so, it feels like we have less and less time to get the good work done, the meaningful work done. So if you're prioritizing it in that way, then at the end of the week, you will have gotten 15 things done at work. You might even want to do that in your personal life. Could you imagine getting 30 things done in a week? Some of you may get much more than that done, but a lot of us probably struggle to get that many things accomplished, especially if we do suffer from, perfectionism, procrastination. So also think about what your frog is. This was attributed to Mark Twain when he said, if you eat a live frog first thing in the morning, nothing worse will happen the rest of your day. And I think that that's pretty funny and pretty on par with Mark Twain's personality. He was one of my favorite authors as a kid. So think about that. What's your frog? What's the thing that you are constantly pushing to the back of your to-do list? Do that thing first. Exercise is always an eat the frog for a lot of people. But whatever you feel most overwhelmed by, that's your frog. Do that first, and you will feel a sense of accomplishment and momentum. Know your finish line. So our finish line typically at UA is going to be 4:45. So try to stop and wrap up about 4:30 so that you can take the last 15 minutes to think about and plan for your next day. Close out your email, check it one last time, clean off your desk, get yourself set up for the next day, and you won't dread having that next thing to do when you walk in the door the next morning. There's also some transition strategies from home to work, from work to home. And these are just a checklist item, so y'all can come back to the slides and look at that later. And then life switches. So scheduling the unexpected. This is for people who may be having a major life event or transition that, maybe you're struggling a little bit more. These are some things that you can do, but stop and pause, give yourself some breaks, review your calendar and commitments, budget extra time, maybe move some projects around, ask for help, delegate tasks, follow your new plan and schedule what you need to get done, and then just keep moving through it. So a lot of times when we're in a season of hard, we just have to keep putting one step, one foot in front of the other and taking that step. And then weekly check-ins. So what are my warning signs that life's getting out of balance? What changes do I need to make to feel more balanced or have more harmony? What do I need to do in my relationships? What do I need to say yes to? What do I need to say no to? Maybe pick one thing to say no to this week. And what's one thing I can do to be less busy? How long has it been since I've done something new or fun? Those are all great questions to ask yourself when you're feeling overwhelmed. And now we have made it to the end of our resources. So this is a toolkit of resources that will help support your work-life balance. And I'll move through just so that you can see those. Some books that we recommend. We would love for you to follow us on our social media channels that the Wellness Work-Life team do an excellent job of maintaining. And we have reached the end. So I will ask if y'all have any questions or anything that y'all would like us to talk more about. And I'm going to go out of presenter mode so that I can see the chat. And Allison, any last words from you as well?
Well, we've given you a lot of resources today. I just think, the first thing to do is get used to being good to yourself and self compassion, and know that this, creating these kinds of habits into your life takes a lot of patience with yourself when you're not used to taking care of yourself. But it has to start there. So be good to you.
I love that. Thank you, Allison. You model that so well for all of us. And I love all of the things I'm seeing in the chat. Those are great. Wonderful. Any questions? Thanks for all of the interaction in the chat. I think this has been a record-breaking chat session. Yes, I love reading all of your comments. Thank you. I know we're at our 1 o'clock time, so if any of y'all need to leave, that is completely fine. You will get your credit for class, but we'll hang on just for a couple of minutes and make sure that we get all of your questions answered and see all of your great comments. Thank you. And thanks for your patience as we learn Teams. This is only number 2 of Teams wellness webinars this summer, so those will get better and better as we work out some of the technological presenter view side of things. Thanks for your wonderful comments. We appreciate that. All right. Well, thank y'all so much. I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Allison, it's always good to see you. Thanks for being here with us and sharing your expertise. And we will wish y'all well and a good roll tide. Thanks, y'all.